And now shifting focus to some big developments from South Africa. The first group of white South Africans who have been granted refugee status by Washington are heading to the United States. As per reports, a group of 49 white South Africans departed their homeland on Sunday for the United States on a private charter plane. The group, which includes families and small children, is due to arrive at Dulles International Airport outside Washington.
The routes we have in the application. The flight is coming from Texas via Dakar and then to OR Tambo. At 8 o'clock they take off Dakar and then they go to Washington, Dallas Airport in Washington, D.C. and then to Texas again.
Now, the crackdown on immigration has been a key agenda for U.S. President Donald Trump. His administration has paused other refugee programs, halting arrivals from Afghanistan, Iraq, and most of sub-Saharan Africa. But it has fast-tracked the applications of white South Africans. Why? Because, as per Trump, white South Africans are facing discrimination by South Africa's black majority. In February, Trump issued an executive order accusing South Africa's black-led government of racial discrimination against the Afrikaner group, who are mostly descendants of Dutch settlers. He cut all aid to South Africa and announced a program to offer them relocation to America. At the heart of Trump's accusation is South Africa's land reforms, meant to redress inequalities entrenched under the former apartheid system. Now, Trump has claimed it would allow the government to seize Afrikaners' agricultural property without compensation. However, the South African government has called this misinformation. It has repeatedly insisted that no land will be forcibly seized under the law. In South Africa, around 70% of land is owned by white minority, who make up around 7% of the total population. The Trump administration insists the South African government is pursuing racist anti-white policies. His views are believed to be echoing his ally, tech billionaire Elon Musk. Now, Elon Musk, who was born in South Africa, has repeatedly accused the South African government of encouraging a white genocide, an accusation Pretoria strongly denies. Now, in the past few months, South Africa-US ties have taken a plunge. The US also expelled the South African ambassador, avoided G20 meetings, and imposed high tariffs. The South African government has hoped for dialogue. President Ramaphosa spoke to Trump last month and said that both leaders will meet soon to diffuse tensions. However, the US refugee program has moved fast. The White House has reportedly said this is the first in a much larger scale relocation effort. The South African government said there was no justification for them being relocated, but added it wouldn't stop them and respected their freedom of choice. Many in South Africa are puzzled by claims that white South Africans are persecuted and meet the requirements to be relocated as refugees. Even the group's leading white South African cause have rejected it. But reports say that at least 70,000 white South Africans are interested in the plan and are thankful to the US president.
We've been forgotten. It's very hard for us to travel. It's very hard for us to get visas. So to suddenly hear that a country like the United States is offering us refugee status was a really big deal. And I was so excited. I felt so relieved. It just felt like a lifeline.
The migration underscores how racial divides still shape South African politics. Even 30 years after apartheid, the move reflects unresolved tensions and unequal narratives about victimhood. What will be the implications of this exodus for South Africa? For more on this, we have with us Ayanda Sishiwexel, political commentator and journalist, who is joining us live from Johannesburg. Thank you for being with us, Ayanda.
Thank you very much, Alyson, and good afternoon to all of the Firstpost listeners.
What are the legal and diplomatic implications of President Trump's executive order accusing South Africa's black-led government of racial discrimination?
Alyson, I don't think that there are any legal implications when it comes to our democracy and our constitution as a whole, but there definitely are diplomatic implications with this accusation. We know that South Africa is part of the African Growth Opportunity Act, which means that any businesses that have any kind of interaction with the United States will be able to have this interaction on a fast-track basis according to a goal. We can have access to the US economy in terms of trade. That will definitely be on the line now that Donald Trump is president of the United States, and now that these executive orders have come out. So when that is up for renewal, I definitely do believe that South Africa will no longer be part of the Africa Growth Opportunity Act. What it's also implemented is, as you mentioned in your introduction, is that we have no ambassador anymore. We have, of course, at the point in Mr. Jonas in order to replace Ibrahim Rasool. But now the problem is that will Mr. Jonas be allowed to enter into the United States as ambassador representing us with these diplomatic issues that we're currently having because of these accusations that have been labeled against us as a country we have yet to see. Also, the diplomatic issues with this is obviously because South Africa is going to be hosting the G20. Will Donald Trump and the United States be participating in the G20? He has implemented that. He said that he will not be doing that, but it still is yet to see whether or not the United States will have any semblance of representation in this G20 summit that is coming up. And also other implications such as PEPFAR being taken away and the devastating consequences that has had. Of course, here in our health sector, 17% of our health budgets comes from PEPFAR. So we are taking a hit, but it is not as bad as other countries such as Uganda, such as Lesotho that do rely on PEPFAR a little bit more. And so we're seeing those HIV numbers starting to rise as well. So the implications rather of this US aid being cut and PEPFAR being cut is going to have far-reaching implications even after the Trump administration has done ruling the regime in the United States.
And I wonder, how might this refugee policy impact racial dynamics and political discourse within South Africa, especially regarding the land reform policy and minority rights?
It's already begun. And this misinformation and disinformation campaign has started well before the Trump administration. If you look at 2018 and 2019, we had white-based interest groups going and speaking to the likes of Senator Ted Cruz, speaking about the so-called genocide that is taking place in South Africa. And I just want to state that even though it was said in the introduction that there is no kind of genocide that is taking place in South Africa. We know what a genocide looks like. It is currently taking place in Gaza as we speak right now. There's no such thing that is taking place here in South Africa. But we know that what the implications of that misinformation and disinformation campaign has now reached the highest echelons of the White House, which has now resulted in refugee status and victimhood being given to a population that in South Africa is currently thriving. You said in your introduction that 70% of the land is owned by 7% of the population. But I also want to make sure that people understand that 8% so there's 40% unemployment in South Africa. When you look at those who are unemployed, majority of them are Black people. If you look at the population of those who are actually employed, the majority of people who are employed in this country are white because unemployment amongst the white race amounts to 8%. These are facts that you can find on Statistics SA. What I'm trying to say is that these are going to have higher implications on the ways in which we deal with social cohesion because we're currently still dealing with the effects of not only apartheid, but even before apartheid with the project of colonialism, the land theft that took place, the loss of language, the loss of education, the loss of culture. We're still trying to get that back. And what this does is actually hamper on our social cohesion project that we're currently having here in South Africa because of the vast differences that we currently have in our society, the inequality that exists, the schools and the differences between the schools that exist in provinces such as Gauteng and in the Western Cape, which were former rich countries, rich provinces, and if you look at the provinces such as Eastern Cape, in KZN, was a former Bantustan. The schools that exist there are really, really harrowing and the infrastructure is not equal. And so what we see is that this was happening with the Trump administration is that they are sowing divisions of racial tension here in South Africa, and we need to reject it with the veracity in which it deserves.
Right. And what precedent does this set for US immigration policy? Could it open the door for other groups to claim refugee status based on similar grounds?
Sure about how it will have large implications on the US law as it stands, because currently they've stopped all of the other refugee programs except for the programs of the people who have a certain hue that look like a certain group of people. And so for them, the project of refugee status, of course, will continue. But for people who are from Syria, from Yemen, from Afghanistan, this will definitely have legal implications for them. Because then this means that do they also get to have the same refugee status that is being conferred onto these 49 white South Africans? Will they be able to have the same problems that these so-called 49 South Africans have? I don't think that is possible. If you're looking at the environment currently right now in the United States, law is taken as somewhat of a suggestion than actual law, which is why we have Donald Trump doing what it is that he is doing with such impunity. I mean, we have judges that are currently being arrested in the United States. We have students who are being yanked out of class and put into ICE vans and isolated in prisons just because of their right to protest. So currently, as it stands right now, I do not know what protections the refugee statuses are going to have. I do not know what the refugee status is going to look like for refugees when they are entering into the United States. But what I know is that these 49 people who are going to be entering into the United States are going to be changing the refugee system, because now there will be certain precedents that refugees within the country can lean on legally to say that these people were granted statehood and citizenry. What makes them different from me? So I think from that perspective, there definitely will be changes.
Yeah.
But on an international perspective, I highly doubt that. This is the USA once again moving against the current, moving against what is democratically correct and what is, for human rights, according to the Human Rights Charter of the United Nations, especially when it comes to the treatment of refugees. They are sorely lacking. And what we're going to see is the implications of that moving forward as they become a pariah state.
And thank you very much for being with us on First Post Africa. As always, great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.